Good evening. Hiya, guys. Welcome to our roundtable. It's a pleasure to have you all joining us. Obviously, I'm Sam Smith from Amicus, and yeah, I'm really happy to have everyone joining us talking around Gen AI, sort of products, engineering, how we can protect those. So I've got a fantastic panel, and yeah, I'll introduce that very shortly. But in terms of where this topic has come from, I know as engineering leaders, the topics I discuss with them and everything around engineering at the moment is all seeming to flow into Gen AI, specifically from engineers and managing teams and how these engineers can use these tools. So they're kind of the topics we're going to be discussing this evening. Hopefully, we'll have loads of interesting tangents and things we'll talk about, but I won't talk over everybody, and I'll leave it to Vaishali to introduce herself and the rest of the team.
Find my unmute button. Thanks, Sam. Really happy to be here tonight. My name is Vaishali. I am engineering manager at Beauty Pie. I've been in the software industry for, showing my age now, about 25 years. I've been here a long time. And AI is a big advancement. I think it's probably one of the bigger advancements I've seen since I've been a software engineer. So yeah, really excited to have this conversation and listen to all the different perspectives. I'll pass on to Margot.
Thanks, Vaishali. Hi, I'm Margot Krouwer. I'm the CEO and founder of Maigo Limited. We're an AI product company. We're launching our first application soon called Seedling, which is an AI life coach. So get excited for that. I've been in AI for over a decade now. So I like to say before it was cool. Before I was a founder, I was an engineering manager. And before that, I was an engineer. And I'll pass it off to Sean.
Thank you. Yeah, so Sean, I'm head of engineering at Aleph Alpha in Germany. I've been dabbling in AI for at least 10 years. Also kind of, like you say, maybe before it was cool, worked on safety critical AI applications in my time, and currently focused on building AI-driven products for industry. So yeah, I've seen it, I see a lot these days. So very keen to bounce ideas around with other folks. I'll pass it on to Rokas.
Nice one. Rokas, I work as an engineering manager at Superscript, and as well, utilizing various AI tools for my personal work as well as team. So I'm really happy to be in this panel and have a chat with all of you.
Fantastic. So I suppose the crux of I think I touched upon it when I introduced it is a lot of these advancements are taking place, as Charlie said, and it's probably the biggest thing that everyone's talking about at the moment. So our topic tonight is talking around obviously protecting teams, protecting products, and how we're using this. So I suppose I'll just very briefly just ask the panel, why are these topics needing to be covered, and why do we need to have these discussions as leaders?
I don't mind starting. I think one of the things I've seen very recently, actually, as everyone starts to use AI and all the people who haven't been using it for 10 years now, it's more in the mainstream and everyone starts using it, and they start seeing the benefits of, oh, this thing that used to take me 3 days to do now takes me 10 seconds to do. That's now filtering down through to the engineering teams. And I think one of the things I'm seeing is the expectations of how long something will take to create a feature development, that kind of thing. Like those expectations are now being passed down to the engineering team without the understanding actually of the impact of what happens with that, what actually happens in engineering with AI. And that is, for me, that's the protecting the team part of it, where actually, the stakeholder and business expectation is, well, why can't you do this? Because I asked AI to do it and it gave me a script, so why can't you do the same kind of thing and have this ready for me within a day? And protecting the team and explaining and giving the stakeholders a bit more of that education and nuance around why we can't just do it because ChatGPT told them they could do it in 10 minutes. And that for me is some of that conversation I'm having with stakeholders and some of that pushback I'm having to give. At the same time, it's also me then going to the engineers going, hey, why can't you use these AI coding tools to like refactor a little bit better, make our tech stack a bit better? And so I think I'm having to like play two roles. One is I'm educating myself from the engineering side of things. Actually, how can we do things better, be more effective and more efficient? But also pushing back on the stakeholders, going, hey, this thing is still going to take us to a sprint to do because of X, Y, and Z. And that's some of the kind of experience I'm having. I don't know if anyone else on the panel's having kind of similar conversations or experiences as well.
Yeah, I think you kind of touch on the main point, which is expectation alignment. I feel like with the current social platforms, that hype on the technology is definitely focused to marketing rather than reality. And then that hands-on real experiences where you can get the real baseline. I had situations where the C-level people come up excited after the weekend coding with Replit and saying, I have just made an app. And you understand that now perception is very different from the past time. I also had experiences with engineers who are trying some solutions and then overhyped, but then in 5 days' time, they figure out themselves kind of in the rabbit hole where you burn the tokens and it don't deliver anything anymore. So just to kind of really understand where we are at the moment and how to adopt it in a sustainable way that you're not overhyped internally and then you have backwards strategy, how to go back if something doesn't work the right way. I think that is not that much talked in the industry as all the hype we witness on a daily basis.
I think riffing off that hype aspect, there's something going on in the zeitgeist of this whole AI-driven development thing where we're constantly being reminded that there's someone else out there that's better at it than the rest of us and is absolutely crushing it with these tools. And it's just us that are not necessarily as good as some of these so-called people. But I have yet to see a full-on product, go to market, conquer the world, all built by one person AI. I haven't seen this yet. I think we need to remind ourselves that, we're all still at the beginning phases. We're all still learning, and there is uncertainty, and that can be anxiety-inducing for some folks. But we must just treat it as a learning opportunity and just remind ourselves that it's okay to go at our own pace as long as we get on the journey here. And we don't need to feel anxious about that. There's this 10x AI developer out there that's doing it way better than us. I think everyone is still at the beginning stages trying to figure out how to use these tools effectively.
Just building off of what everyone has already mentioned, which are fantastic points, I think there's also the product aspect of things too. So many products these days are AI products that used to just be engineering products before. It's not just legal services or a music app, right? It's an AI-centered X thing. And so, increasingly, we need a knowledge of AI in order to understand the domain space effectively, which is a huge part of engineering. But then it's where does it go too far? AI can't do everything, but we still need to know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah, and obviously that's sort of why we're having these calls. And I think Vaishali, you touched upon one of the key things as managers and leaders within this space. That is expectations versus reality, essentially. And so towing that line already, how do you have those conversations as leaders with your teams? What's like the key things that you've noticed so early on in this AI sort of I suppose life cycle within these teams now? How do we as leaders sort of start having those conversations? That's to everyone, by the way, not just Vaishali. See if anybody else has any ideas.
I have two. I think one trend I see is referring to AI as the AI, right? Like it's one mythical monolith out there over a hugely diverse selection of tools and capabilities. So I think a key starting point, just like we would talk about Postgres, different than MongoDB, right? They're very different types of tools and technologies, is an understanding of what AI can do what, right? And having that sort of baseline awareness and foundational knowledge such that we can have literate conversations about AI. And then I think a second key piece is understanding the difference between a demo and a scalable production-worthy application, and making sure, again, that literacy is there from senior leadership down to, the IC level.
Yeah, and I think communication and knowledge about these tools is paramount. Like you say, engineers and engineering managers, leaders have to do a lot of clear communication about what the boundaries of these tools are and where they fit into the wider tool suite of software engineering, like you say, to develop production grade systems, and to give non-technical stakeholders the right vocabulary when describing and talking about these what it is they expect from teams and products and all the rest of it. I think what we're human beings, what do we like to do when we find a new tool? We try to use it to solve every single problem. It's the silver bullet dynamic, right? I think we're starting to see the limits of the current generation of silver bullets. But that does not mean we should dismiss them out of hand. It's about understanding them well. What tools are they effectively at solving, and slot them in with the rest of our tools, and clearly define how these tools fit into our greater software engineering processes, and make it easier to digest and understand for the non-technical folk that are involved in these conversations.
Just to build on the same topic, I think it's also essential to have transparency and sharing the wins and the failures across the business and tech, because that helps them to better understand where these tools really work on the production level systems versus wipe coding a CRUD application that you can ship in 4 hours. And that as well then kind of builds that expectation management 2 directions. One is for the business stakeholders, and the other one goes back to the ICs, because there are some engineers as well who are overhyped by the X platform messages. Then they try things out and nothing works in a similar fashion. And if you have that high expectation upfront, that kills your motivation to move on, because you feel like either you don't understand it or it doesn't work at all. So just having that very close experimentation and sharing of the wins and losses, I personally found in the teams, pushes that needle further through the adoption and as well as expectation management.
Yeah, a healthy team culture around learning is extremely valuable, and it helps folks navigate the space together. Not one person is not going to figure out every trick in the book. If we're all incorporating these tools into our workflow, we can learn from each other. We can talk about what went well, what didn't. I had another point to make, but I'll come back to it later.
You've forgotten it, Sean. I think there's a couple of different aspects that I've experienced. So actually on the flip side of, I think what Rokas said, is actually getting engineers excited about AI and using it. I think a lot of them have had a poor experience like a year or so ago, where actually the coding tools were not that good. Whereas if I look at the landscape today and all the different tools they have available, it's a very different landscape a year on. It's very advanced now. And I'm actually now very excited about it. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have been like, no, don't bother with the AI coding tools. They're not going to help you. They're going to cause you more problems. Whereas actually today I'm like, guys, get excited about it. This is actually quite good now. I compare it to very old school when I went from using MSDN CDs to help me to IntelliSense coming out, and how my developer life changed when IntelliSense came out, and I could type the full stop and it gave me all of my documentation. It was brilliant. And I kind of say I can't imagine being a developer now and having AI on the side being able to do all this other stuff for me. The other one though, for me, is reminding from a business perspective and stakeholder perspective, is reminding them there is still a human behind the AI and what they perceive as AI that is happening. And we've done this at BeautyPie in a little bit of an educational way, in that we have used LLM to power some of the functionality we have on our website. But then we've had feedback from stakeholders to kind of go, oh, well, I tried to use this functionality and this product's not coming up. And we're like, yeah, because we have to code in some of those rules still. That still is us training that that model, we still have to educate the model. Like, it's not just magic. We're not just going to put this thing in and then it's there forever and it's magic. It needs to be maintained. There's another person behind it that has to do some work. So I think there's two aspects for me. I'm still struggling with the stakeholder business side of things, but getting engineers excited about it as well. So we've created a little bit of a little group of a few engineers who are very interested in using it, and getting them to try the different aspects out and what frustrations and challenges it's helping them with, and kind of then going out to the wider engineering, and then we'll presenting those to kind of go, hey, this is what we used it for, this is what we found, this is good, this is bad, what else can we try it with, that kind of thing.
I suppose with that, Sean, you touched upon sort of like teaching and learning from one another. Have we got examples as a group where we've created like a resource, or even found resources that are out there at the moment to allow our teams to sort of use this and implement this? Has there been a case of sort of that knowledge sharing already taking place within our teams?
I would say it's still pretty a bit of a wild west out there. I think, I find taking lessons learned from some of the model and product makers or developers saying, hey, we've developed this tool. These are the best practices around using this tool. I think following those has generally been a good starting point for our teams, and then letting the teams upon adopting these tools in their own domain, kind of take it from there, and then broadcast that. Again, this doesn't feel like a very sophisticated answer, but it's because this is all so early and so new. There isn't a big fat book on how to do this just yet. I think we're probably about a year away from this. And again, it's classic software engineering. Even if there were a so-called book, every software project is a custom job, essentially. And so familiarity with the fundamentals of the tools is what's going to make you most effective over time.
I suppose with how quick sorry, Margot, I know I've just jumped in. Apology. I was just saying, with how quick things are iterating as well, like, what points do we allow teams to use the newest models and sort of expect them to use those, or like, do we expect them to use what they're comfortable with to start with and then move on? How do we manage that? I suppose I'll hand that over to Marco to maybe answer that one or the previous question.
Actually, that's a great segue to what I was going to say anyway. When I was an engineering manager at Clio, one thing we did is build up internal tooling around variant testing, which is a pretty well-known practice in engineering, A/B testing, maybe different pieces of content, right, or pieces of software. So we really just did the same thing with AI. So once new models or platforms were released, we would just test those with our internal tools. And because AI is so data and content dependent as well, what was really useful about this is we could have our internal, content developers or UX folks or people like this actually see the output from different models and, give a score to different AI. And we were also able to roll out our own internal AI to reproduce some of those scoring mechanisms so that you had LLMs judging other LLMs. And that kind of made that process of iteration and conversation a lot more scalable.
Brilliant. I suppose, was there anything that when you were A/B testing, was there anything that immediately came out where, I know, you were able to measure the impact of that quicker or sort of more effectively? Was there any like specific examples that you had?
Yeah, so we had developed an internal questionnaire when it came to quality of content. So is this factually accurate? Is the content engaging, et cetera? So what we were able to do is use that same scorecard, let's say, across different models. One thing I will say that's I think a good warning, tangible example is obviously there's a different cost when it comes to all of these models. So like a word to the wise is when you're doing this testing, testing, like one thing we found out is, oh, our costs have actually surged when we're using one model over another. It might be, the latest GPT that's fine-tuned as an example. In giving a tangible example, not only is it important to look at, the content, of course, the effectivity of the models, but when doing this testing, I think really important that you're looking at the tokens, being processed, and you have some sort of guardrails in place to make sure it's not only producing better results, but it's actually sustainable for your business.
Brilliant. I noticed, Rokas, you were sort of looking to jump in a moment ago before I cut you off.
I think I'm going back to the initial question around the sources, how to kind of keep up to date with the change happening. Like what I've personally found, is I guess to add on what Sean was saying is you have to understand the fundamentals first, and then usually rely on the frontier model SDKs and tutorials and cookbooks to just keep it close, because the pace of change is enormous. And like if you want to be knowledgeable on all the things that are now in the market, pretty much will not have any depth in their knowledge, just to repeat what is being told. And having that deep understanding and focusing to some frontier models like Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini is already kind of a good bounded area of tools you can embrace in your teams and try out.
Perfect. And one of the, I suppose, key things that we previously discussed, and that actually was discussed at one of our previous events at BeautyPie with Vaishali, was, I suppose, measuring the impact. We've all had, I say we all have, I know I've spoken to founders that have said, oh, I shipped X amount of lines of code over the weekend with this tool, and it did this, it did that. But then when you speak to the engineers and actually then trying to get them excited about using it, they then talk about impact of what you're actually using, whether that's on the teams or the products. So that is kind of, I suppose, the next sort of topic I wanted to discuss was how do we measure impact? What impact do we measure? And where do we start as EMs? And obviously further higher up down the chain. So where do we start as leaders?
Yeah,
sure.
it's an interesting, I think that's a really interesting topic, because there are so many different things you can measure depending on what the focus is. And I know someone, I think, was in the audience who said that they did 10,000 lines of code within 10 minutes or something. So, again, why can't the developers? And he was trying to get his developers to do the same thing. And we were like, there was a hot debate around, well, actually, what are you measuring? The quality that's coming out and the impact that code is having, or just the lines of code, right? One of the things I think that I look at a lot actually is none of our systems are perfect. There's a lot of refactoring, a lot of tech debt and stuff that can happen. And a lot of the time that tech debt is not being addressed because actually it's going to take a long time for us to address that. And I think it's personally and professionally, I think it's a really good use of AI, right? Asking AI going, hey, I've got this piece of code, it's not, can you tell me how we could do this better? And where it kind of analyzes your solution and gives you like those suggestions as to where to update and do it. And then I know some of the coding tools will actually, once you've reviewed what the changes are, you can just press one button and it will go and do those changes for you. But the impact then comes on, do you have the testing available to make sure it's not broken anything fundamental in your system? Do you have automation testing? Or actually now are you increasing the manual testing because you have to do all that regression again and that kind of stuff? And I think that's where the impact comes in. It's really easy to make a change with AI, but what's the impact downstream before you can actually put that into production and get it live? That might be a huge cost to someone. And I think looking at all those different practices, it's not just one lens, right? It's like a 4D, 5D thing that you have to look at when it comes to AI. I could get the code and I could make a refactoring change, but I'll probably impact my team for a sprint while they go through and review all the changes their engineering manager did. And we don't want that happening. And so I think it's the guard, as I think we've spoken about it before, right? So those guardrails around the changes we're making and the impact we have with that. But on the other hand, hey, if I've done those changes and I've done that refactoring that actually would have taken us 2 weeks to do, but I've done it in a day, and there's only 1 day of regression testing that we need to do, well, then that's a huge win, right? But it's trial and error. I think a lot of it is trial and error right now. I'm finding the right people. Like, you need to have the really good engineers who know what they're doing, who know what they're looking for to do that kind of work right now.
Yeah.
Go for
Sorry,
it.
Sean, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on what you're trying to measure is and what you value as impact is super important. I think particularly when you're speaking to founders, product people, they're concentrated or they're focused on the 0 to 1 aspect of software, which is like I have nothing, I need something, and it needs to kind of sort of work to demonstrate some initial value. Software engineering is fundamentally about value over time, quality of code over time. So it's like 0 to 1 is important, but what about 1 to 1,000 over 5 years? That is a different equation. And then when you spoke about what different parts of the SDLC are impacted by AI and where it could be useful and how it compresses time or expands time in different places is kind of very interesting. I think something that I've just found personally is I find the requirements phase is a lot smaller than it used to be. It's much faster to aggregate information and develop structured requirements using AI tools before you start coding than before. So that vastly accelerates the development time just there. And if you want to think of requirements gathering as probably one of the most important parts of the process, ironically, it's the non-coding parts where it adds some of the greatest value in my workflow personally.
What's in terms of sort of that measuring that impact, like is that amount of like hours, is it days, is it dependent on who you're speaking with, is it even longer than that? So where's the, I suppose typically with that requirement gathering, sort of where's the most value, I suppose, from that side? Is it summarizing things as well, or sort of as a whole, like sort of how much value are you personally seeing?
I think I would say it's at least 10x. And the reason I say that is because it's not just how much it can output in a single shot, it's the what do you want to call it? How complete those requirements are. It's you often when we get a problem statement, the focus is quite narrow. I think sometimes you can use AI and these kinds of tools to broaden the lens through which you observe a problem. You can actually get a whole bunch. It allows you to ask a greater variety of questions, a greater coverage of questions at the requirements phase much sooner, and it allows you to farm out those questions to the right people sooner because kind of when we chew on a problem, it takes us a few days to really get our heads in the game. Then we think, okay, I've got to ask someone from finance about this and someone from legal about that. I feel like you can prompt those kinds of questions much, much sooner. And that is what compresses a lot of the time. So you get a more complete answer faster. I find with very complex software, enterprise software, with multiple dimensions involved, it's at least a 10x saving on that side.
Amazing. Rokas, I believe, again, I cut you off for a second time.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I think I like that point about requirement gathering because I feel like the documentation aspect that LLMs helps you to get to the better place is one of the areas that I usually miss in conversations. Like from a personal experience, not even gathering the requirements, but just collating all the project information using LLMs helps you to just get that right onboarding and speed it up much more than otherwise you would have to kind of skim through the whole Notion or other documents just to get a sense of what you're building. And the other angle as well is engineer onboarding, because there's always this situation where everyone wants documentation, but no one wants to contribute, or the documentation becomes stale for the software products you maintain and support. And I found, again, the same cursor AI using and just going through the code base and then extrapolating that information around the requirements, the way that things work, the architecture just does the job to the level that is good enough to understand the system. So that basically makes documenting these pieces of software not necessary anymore because you can use the tools that can derive that from the code base itself. And it also have that advantage that it doesn't stale because it's always dynamic. It's always from your GitHub repo. And yeah, so that's one of the aspects of where that value is. And the other one, what we tried in the teams as well, and I still believe it's really hard to measure, but is to understand how much time do developers can really save creating PRs on the production level code base. And the way we did that experiment was more of an engineer trying to use a prompting to define what he wants to reach or get out of it as a PR, and then trying to tell from personal experience how much he think he would have taken time to deliver the same solution. So like our calculations in that case, and again, the audience who did that were the developers who were like ambassadors of AI, so they're really good at that. It was around like 20-ish% savings only, because then they obviously have a PR review and then QA and then release cycle. So it's only like a tiny fraction of that work. But yeah, it is in that angle as well. Like what we measured is around like 20% only of improvement, but it is existing.
Just jumping in here to speak to Sean and Rokas's points, which I think are fantastic. On one end, we've got almost like the product requirements aspect of AI. And on the other hand, we've got the engineering efficiency aspect of AI. And, just speaking to the first point, as a new founder who has been an engineering manager who expects the 0 to 1 functionality and is actually putting it into practice, one thing I found really helpful is redirecting that 0 to 1 thinking into tests. Right? So instead of I want X, Y, Z functionality, what can I actually test? And I can actually use AI to auto-generate those tests. That way I can test my hypotheses as I go. And I found that to be really helpful. And if you're having a difficult conversation, maybe with a founder of what AI can or can't do, helping solidify those requirements into, okay, so if we pass this amount of tests, then that means we're successful here. And having that be a real key part of fleshing out those requirements, I find helpful because it kind of grounds what's possible versus not. Just to Rokas's points about engineering effectiveness, one thing I've really found to be a challenge is that even without AI, having consistent engineering metrics is always such a challenge. If you have something like, PR time, an engineer will say, well, for a large PR versus a small PR, it's totally different, right? So it's completely unfair that I'm judged off of this. So you don't really have a consistent baseline that AI can kind of easily interject into, and you have a clean sort of difference between the two. So I think that's the hard thing here is we need to start with how do we consistently define engineering effectivity, and only from there can we say how much has AI actually improved that threshold.
I think one of the things one of my engineers has said, he's heavily into using the AI coding tools. He's tried a lot of them. And the recent one he's chosen, and he was trying to convince me to get him a license. And his convincing of me was, it's like having a junior developer at your side, And so you can imagine having a junior developer alongside a senior engineer working together. So it's almost like pairing with another engineer, which I think we all know is always a really effective way of developing. And so I was like, cool, if you think if you think it's that good, then right, we'll give it a go. But again, measuring it in reality is really difficult, and it is a bit of hearsay, right? So I'll be like, right, you used it to develop this functionality or to do this thing. How much do you think it saved you? And where they can turn around to me and go, if I'd done this on my own, it would have taken me 2 days, but I did it within half an hour with AI. And so almost just taking that finger in the air estimate right now is kind of the way we're doing it.
I suppose moving away from sort of the teams and its effects on them, how is it affecting sort of, I suppose, products that we're all working on currently? Sort of what is sort of the impact, I suppose, on our products, and when do we decide that, oh yeah, this is the value it can add, and we need to then put it in?
I'm gonna go to a different, like for Beauty Pie at least. We recognized that AI could probably help us in terms of like offering our customers personalization in their shopping experience. We also recognize that we're not a software house and we don't need to hire AI engineers. So actually looking at products that actually will do this for us and help us with this, and getting the right partners in AI to do this for us. And so I think we recognized a very niche part of our business that we needed help with, and we knew AI could help us with. And then finding those products that would help us with it, rather than trying to build it in-house and build that knowledge in-house. We knew actually the most effective way to market was go and find a third-party partner to work with us on that. And that's been really successful, to be honest. But in-house, we still needed that. There was still that learning curve of what is AI? How is it gonna, what data do we need to give this company? How are they going to use that data? What data are we missing that we could give them, and what tracking and that kind of thing. So we still had to level up our knowledge on how we could use AI to make that third party more effective for us as well. So that was one of the ways we kind of looked at like product enhancement and how we could get to market quickly with what our founders and stakeholders are asking us for without us spending months and months doing it ourselves and learning.
Something I've seen in the wild, not so much internally or things I've actively worked on, but out in the wild is just how the shape of products is changing. If you think about chat-like interfaces being the primary way in which folks are interacting with applications these days, people don't want an app with a different layout and a different interface every single time. They want to drive everything through an app interface, or at least they're being conditioned to do so. And I think that's quite a fascinating aspect of the shape and style of products that are being developed right now. Folks are trying to see, well, can I use a chat interface to actually get to this user outcome that I want because it feels more natural to the user? I find that quite fascinating to track in the wild. Don't know what your thoughts are, but I'm seeing a bit of this.
Just touching from the technical angle as well on the same like product development. I feel like there's much more emphasis, at least in our teams as well, to understand what does it mean architecturally building your tools. Like it's kind of intuitively clear that in the near future we'll have different interfaces how we communicate with the applications, with the services. And like one of the aspects we are as well kind of looking into is like MCPs. Like how can you augment all your APIs with the new protocol that is possible to be used by the different agents? Because at some point, as you mentioned, Sheen, there will be a chat that helps you to do the job. You don't need the sophisticated web interface, but you need proper APIs. And then the next part of it is as well a data. Like how do you store the data that it helps you to train these models and get value out of it? Because we as well tried already a couple of proof of concepts, and you then figure out that the data you have is not good enough and it's semantically too ambiguous and you don't get the value. But then you kind of understand that where these points are, where you have to think about next time you develop software. So yeah, these I think are quite important things to think about and embed into the teams and architecture.
I think it is a completely different way of thinking about what products are, right? I think, Sean, you sparked in my head actually that, you don't need to have like product detail pages and product listing pages and a home page and a search page, and you actually just need a chat and someone can just type in what they're looking for. I'm looking for a moisturizer because I've got dry skin, and then we give them all of their options. And I find that really interesting. It reminded me actually of my first experience I had 2 days ago of where I called a car garage up to make an appointment. It was 5 o'clock, didn't realize they were closed, thought they were still open. And the phone was answered by, I don't know, Janine, who, said, "Hey, welcome to such and such garage. My name's Janine. How can I help you?" I thought it was a real person, so I just told her how she could help me. And then it was only on the third time that she spoke where I was like, "Janine, are you AI?" And she was like, "Yes, I'm a virtual assistant." And it honestly blew my mind. Like, I was like, that's incredible. Like, this is a very small car garage. It wasn't a dealership or anything. And having been in the customer service kind of area before, where we've had to build all of if you press one, this happens, and build all that routing, and it's crazy. Like even in AWS, it's crazy to do all of that in their Q product. And the fact that this was very similar to like just a plain website, just type in the question and I'll answer you kind of thing, actually blew my mind. And I think it does challenge how we think about the traditional way of buying things and products and people using technology, right? Won't be surprised the next iPhone's just going to be a blank screen with a search screen on it and no icons.
I suppose then when looking at, I suppose, all these new products and sort of how teams are building it, I suppose it kind of leans into the final topic we were discussing. I suppose is the risks when you are building these new products and working on all these new things. What risks are we, as Sean pointed out, obviously all these new things where it's just a search function, as Vaishali mentioned, it's already in smaller garages. What risks have if we're building something opposite to that then, or risks even building it in general? Where are we seeing, I suppose, things take place?
Yeah, I think some of the broader ones would be, how are the fundamental models trained, on what training data, what data could they potentially expose, how are they biased, have they been debiased? Those are just at the fundamental level. And then on the software engineering side, the stuff at the application level, it's what about your custom data, the data security, is that being exposed? Do you have access to enough data to actually solve the problems that you're worried about? I think the information security like that domain carries a lot.
Yeah, a couple of concerns I see. One is if you're giving proprietary code essentially to another company, right? Like I think there was an incident recently with Samsung and OpenAI. If you're giving core code to another company, you want to be aware of this. And it's one of the reasons I'm hoping people talk more about self-hosting versus not when it comes to AI. There's a lot of chatter about agentic, an MCP, but I think a core fundamental question is, do you want to give away your data, or do you want your data to remain within your own infrastructure, similar to discussions around the cloud? So I think that's really key. I think another important topic is, what is the product you're actually serving, and is it appropriate for AI to be involved? For example, if you have a therapy app, right, and people might be really giving very confidential, personal information about themselves, you might want some very serious guardrails in place around how AI is used.
Yeah, I think
Would as well,
related. Oh, please go for it. Please go for it.
just a couple of other angles as well. I think the pricing as well is quite an important thing, because at this point of time, we're still burning, we see money with all the frontier models, and every iteration has a different pricing logic included. So whatever services you have and whatever like return of investment you are forecasting for your tools you build, that will change because the pricing will change as well. And the other part as well, if you don't use open weight models where you can just deploy them locally, you're basically relying on the APIs where you have no control of what exactly is being served to you, apart from just wake them of GPT-5. But again, that whole control piece and the pricing piece are quite important things to be able to quantify and risk.
I think there's also, we're adding another layer of UX to general population. So we have lots of different generations out there right now who are used to different levels of tech and different trust levels of tech. And I think, you're at the risk of alienating your customers, like or a part of your customer base. If they know you're using AI, they may not trust you anymore, they don't want to use your products anymore. I know a lot of my friends refuse to have Alexa in their house because they don't know what Alexa's listening to. And so, like, if you think there's that level of trust in the younger generations, then actually how do they feel about AI taking over and that kind of thing? So I think there's a risk of that. And also just people not knowing how to use AI and that customer experience that it's given them. On the flip side, it's very easy to hide AI and that you're using AI. And I think there's a risk of actually, there's probably more laws around GDPR and all of that stuff that's going to come out that we all have to now adhere to, whether you're a regulated environment or not. And it makes our work a lot more complicated and a lot more adherence to that kind of thing. And a lot easier to slip up, I think, without knowing that you're doing it if you're not very stringent on that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of risks around it, and we're still learning them all.
100%.
Yeah.
I think riffing off that, the whole software and software as a service supply chain, the tools we rely on to build software applications, where your logs go to, where your product analytics go to, are prompts ending up in these systems? Are the engineering teams aware of these things? Are they taking these things into consideration? Are those platforms compliant in the same way you choose to be? I think understanding your software dependencies and their level of adherence to these security standards is super critical, and it adds a lot more complexity to the building process. So again, coming back to where is time compressed and expanded? The code, the churning out of the code is becoming easier and easier and faster, but the project time is still kind of constant because you need to take the testing and the upfront validation aspects. Those need far more care than they potentially used to be, or at least you used to be able to do these things in conjunction with writing the code because the code was developed at a certain rate. But now that has accelerated so much, we need to actually spend our time budget on these other aspects in a lot more detail.
I suppose linking things back to obviously risks and us as engineering people as engineering leaders. We touched upon getting people excited about AI. How, as engineering leaders, can we make sure they are controlled with what they're doing in a risk sort of way? Because as Margot said, you don't want to just put in obviously your IPs into these and lose control of your code base because your teams are doing things that maybe shouldn't have. How do we make sure as leaders that is being adhered to and those risks are being taken care of?
I think it's important not to forget engineering best practices. And this may seem obvious, but I think, Vaishali, you said this earlier, it's easy to treat AI like magic, right? I might, for an engineer, expect them to go through several iterations of review when it comes to code, but I expect the AI to get it right immediately, even if it's a large, ambiguous project. When we build complex systems, we have things like health checks, as an example. So when I go from system to system, there's great traceability in terms of what's happening. So if you're using AI to build, some mega infrastructure, AI is infamously kind of a black box, right? So you really need those good engineering practices and checks and balances. And also, like you would do with any type of engineering architecture, are you storing confidential or personal data, right? Looking at key privacy concerns and making sure they're inherently handled in how you're architecting the system, making sure, even though we are using AI and it's easy in some ways, we're actually not forgetting these key base principles that underpin really all of engineering.
I think also just making sure you're using the right licensing models when you're using the AI tools. So making sure you're getting the licenses that, don't share your prompts and your code out to everybody else. And that, yes, you'll have to pay a little bit more for that, but actually, if you're adopting this, then get the right licenses. Also, when you're connecting those systems to your internal systems, like your Google Drives and your Confluences and your Jiras, make sure that, cybersecurity are aware that you're doing that. And, those of us who work on MacBooks, it's a little bit more open than having a Windows machine, right? You're allowed to do all of these things if the right controls aren't in place. But I think you have to have the right cybersecurity policies the right cybersecurity training nowadays as well needs to be updated to include AI. And recognizing that when someone's trying to spoof you and that kind of thing, that real training and knowledge, I think, is key. Like as well as the software best practices, as Margot said, we have to have those in place, but making sure that people are aware of the updated security policies within the whole company. And I don't think it's just engineering. I think it's, the marketing teams are using it to connect to the Google Drives and things like that too. So it's everybody, like connecting ChatGPT from your personal account. Your company needs a way of being able to detect that that's what's happening and making sure that we're giving those people the right licenses as well. That's one of the key aspects, I think.
Just adding on top of the points made as well, making sure that the tools you're using have kind of bounded control. Like we had that story about the replit and deleting the production database. I would hope that everyone in our companies have a proper CI/CD process where whatever you're doing with these AI tools, they just have a limited possibility of effect. And the other thing as well is to not fall under the trap of just cutting the corners and getting the result and not verifying it. Because I feel like there will be a lot of security-based incidents in the near future because people will just be tempted to cut that corner and just ship things out because it's already done, it works, but you don't fully understand what exactly happens and how does that affect all the security concerns.
Yeah, I think everyone's made some fantastic points, and I'm sure we could sit here and talk for another hour and go on to even more points. And I don't want to take up everyone's evening, so I suppose I'll just hand over and just leave sort of one final question: is if there was one sort of sentence that, or one thing that EMs can implement right now in their teams that can sort of either measure impact, de-risk, or anything, what would be your key takeaways yourselves that can be put in your team right now? Is there anything that anybody has got as a quick sort of punchline that's going to save people time?
I don't know if I've got a punchline, Sam, or a quick thing. I think what I would love to start seeing is more experimentation with AI when it comes within engineering. So I think what I would love to see is if we took maybe just one small feature, one small user story, we estimate it to be without AI, it's an 8-pointer, it's a 5-day or whatever. Cool, let's fully implement it with AI and now see what happens. I think I would love to start seeing some of that like POCing hackathon-y type thinking coming in, that kind of mindset coming in to kind of go, where is the real benefit? And then we can start figuring out, okay, cool, we know this baseline now. How do we now start measuring some of this? I think once we've got that in, we can start doing some more measurement type stuff. And I don't know, is it making engineers happier? Happy engineers are good engineers. So for me, is it making their lives easier? Is it, stopping some of that as I junior developer stuff that they don't want to do anymore? Does it make it easier for them to kind of implement that? I know that would have made me happier as an engineer, not having to do data models and things like that, where, I could have just got AI to do it, would have been awesome. I think that's what I'd love to start seeing happening a bit more.
I would say encourage your teams to make consistent progress over time that adds value. And you can only do that by sticking to fundamental engineering principles. AI allows you to churn out a lot of code really quickly, but things that still but what's going to enable you to make progress over time is small, measurable changes done consistently. Don't do 2,000, 5,000 PRs, small PRs that are easy to verify, validate, test, and roll out. Those principles still apply in the world of AI.
I was trying to think of something really snappy. And what I came up with is introduce AI for unpopular jobs, testing, documentation, pieces like this that aren't going to impact the stability of your infrastructure or organization, that are only really going to add, hopefully, a benefit. And what this does is naturally add more information and guardrails around what you're trying to do. And I think you can build from there. And hopefully it increases like the popularity of introducing the technology.
Yeah, just to finalize, start small, increment, and then share the knowledge, the wins and the losses in your teams. Because nothing motivates other engineers more than seeing that success story your peer has made. And yeah, and that as well nicely works with what Margot is saying, small steps help you to kind of really control the risks. And then once you understand what is this particular gain, you can build on top of that and expand.
Fantastic.
I think we've all just said the same thing. Start small.
Exactly. I think that summarizes everything really well. Sort of there's a lot of discourse to be had, isn't there? There's a lot of conversations to be discussed around these things, and tonight is just the start of what I imagine. Well, hopefully, will be conversations going on and on and on. And as we've touched upon, there's so many topics we could spend hours on. So I just want to thank you all for joining us. I'm sure sort of the rest of the network that is going to listen to this is going to take some things away. I know that's at least got my topics I speak to engineers about for the next couple of months sorted, at least from my mind. So I'm really grateful of you all joining. But yeah, obviously we're going to be hosting this via obviously all of our channels. So I will give you all a shout out as and when it's released. But thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, that's a wrap.